Is it recording now? Are you sure it's recording? Oh, okay. All right. So, new teaching. Anytime you fix tea for someone and bring it, you also need to pick it up at the end of the talk. It's the complete gesture. That podium, Julie. Can you hear me online?
Gatha on opening the sutra.
I'd like to talk today about trusting stillness. This is the last day of our retreat, 7-day retreat. So you will have noticed that when you sit like this we call it samadhi. There's not a good translation of the word. It's sometimes translated as concentration, but that's not a good translation. But you know what, because you're experiencing this samadhi from your practice, right? Some kind of groundedness, stability, no coming and going. You're kind of just here. Yeah? So this is a good thing. This will fade in a few weeks. But this samadhi is very useful to experience. And when we do a retreat like this, we build this samadhi power through our practice. A sense of stillness, at home, being comfortable in your own skin, just being here, without any relative reference point. Not comparing to anything. Just here. So I'd like to talk about the Yogacara and the eighth consciousnesses, which we'll be appreciating during this Ango. Um, so, the way that the Yogacara teachings were presented through Vasubandhu was that he was attempting to, he was one of the main teachers of the Yogacara teachings, Vasubandhu, and he wrote the 30 verses, which we'll appreciate some during the Ango. But he was attempting to integrate the early teachings, especially the Abhidharma teachings from early Buddhism, which are all about human psychology and very, very precise teachings about our psychology, and not easy to go through the text. It's a bit dry, but a really profound teaching about the nature of human psychology from the Buddhist point of view. And this is one of the Tripitakas is the Abhidharma. And Abhidharma means, we're not talking about Dharma with a big D. Abhidharma means patterns of Dharma. So we're talking about the Dharma of flower arranging, the Dharma of cooking, the Dharma of sewing. So we're talking about Dharma with a small d, the kind of domestic, homey quality of it. Not a big D. How we experience it. And Vasubandhu was trying to integrate this early teaching of Buddhism with what came later were the Mahayana teachings. And there was kind of divide between the early teachings and the Mahayana. So he was very much wanting to integrate the two. And I was very fortunate to study with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who also was a Vajrayana teacher who integrated the early teachings of Buddhism with Mahayana and Vajrayana. And so the way that I'm thinking about this teaching for our Ango is also a way of which has always kind of made sense to me, is to integrate the early teachings of Buddhism, which tend to be quite analytical, with the Mahayana teachings of the Bodhisattva vow, true nature, Tathagata Garbha, Buddha nature teachings, with Vajrayana by connecting them all to the 5 Buddha families. And I think it's important to be precise about when we start to talk about our experience and our emotions and our afflictions. It's important to try as much as possible to be precise about how we're looking at our experience. Try to be as precise as possible. And the early Buddhist teachings are very, very good this way. They're really quite surprising. So here's a koan along the Yogacara lines. It's case 29 from the Gateless Gate. Not the wind, not the flag. The wind was flapping a temple flag, and 2 monks were having an argument about it. One said, "The flag is moving." The other said, "No, the wind is moving." They argued back and forth, but could not reach an agreement. And the 6th patriarch came by and said, It's not the wind that moves. It's not the flag that moves. It's your mind that moves. And the two monks were struck with awe. In Mumonkan's commentary, it is not the wind that moves. It is not the flag that moves. It is not the mind that moves. Where do you see the essence of the patriarch? If you have a close grasp of the matter, you will see how the two monks, intending to buy iron, got gold. And what the patriarch impatiently said was a failure on the spot. In the verse, the wind moves, the flag moves, the mind moves. All have missed it. They only know how to open their mouths and do not know their words have failed. So now I'm going to proceed to open my mouth too. So there's another story about this particular koan. There was a nun, Joshin, who's in our women's ancestors. We appreciate Joshin. She was a disciple of Master Kyozan. And she was in charge of the guest house at the Kyozan monastery. And one day, 17 monks came to visit from the Shoku district. And they were coming to visit Kyozan. And the evening, they were discussing this koan. And they had missed the point. And Joshin, who had been listening to their conversation behind a sliding door, said in a loud voice, how pitiable these 17 blind donkeys are. They never even dreamed of Buddha's Dharma. And instead of being angered by these words, the monks were humbled and they asked her to teach them. And in a strong, authoritative voice, she said, it is not the wind that moves. It is not the flag that moves. It is not the mind that moves. And upon hearing this, all the monks were enlightened. And they bowed to her and became her disciples and returned home without even seeing Kyozan. This is a famous story in the tradition because it's a story of the most people getting enlightened all at one time. So, I want to talk a little bit about the Yogacara teachings of the 8 consciousnesses. And this is I think it's a wonderful, very practical teaching. So I think it's important to approach teachings from both an experiential, intuitive, emotional point of view, but it's also important to approach the teachings from a scholarly and theoretical point of view. Real understanding of the teachings needs to be both an intelligent one and one that's experienced. We need both. So the intuitive side is our emotional, experiential experience. The intellectual side is the scholarly and theoretical one. Both are valid and both are necessary. Now, in Buddhism, there was already a teaching of what are called the 6 sense consciousnesses. The 5 senses and mind was considered the 6th consciousness. And that teaching was already in early Buddhism. And what the Yogacara school did is they added two more consciousnesses, the seventh and the eighth. And there's even a ninth. Look up, yeah. There's even a ninth, which is sometimes, it's not always spoken of in the Yogacara teaching, but sometimes it is. For instance, Roshi mentions it in his teaching about the 8 aspects of Buddhism. So this is called, Yogacara is a mind-only school. Thich Nhat Hanh refers to it as the manifestation-only school. Sometimes it's referred to as the consciousness-only school. And it's important to be clear about this. The point of these teachings is to help us understand our experience with more precision. And what they're saying is that our experience is nothing but mind. There's no way to have an experience without mind being involved. Everything we experience is through the mind. What they are not saying that reality is nothing but mind. They're not saying anything about reality. It's not a metaphysical teaching. We don't know about reality, but what we do know is what we experience. And everything we experience is through mind. This is a very helpful perspective, because we're projecting all the time out there. We think there's something out there. Our projection is nothing but mind. So instead of this being this is not a philosophical teaching, it's more of an epistemology. About the epistemology is the nature of knowing, how we know. It's also what you might call a how do you pronounce it? Soteriology. It's about freedom, about teaching about liberation, spiritual liberation, enlightenment. We can use that word, can't we? It's okay? Should we apologize for it? So in the 8 consciousness teachings, we have the 5 senses, and the way they think of, for something to be conscious. Now, in the West, we think of consciousness as something or other, something, but we don't really define it. No one actually knows what that means. If you actually try to ask neuroscientists about it, they don't know what it means. Psychologists think they know what it means, but I'm not sure anyone knows what consciousness actually means. So, from a Buddhist point of view, in order for there to be consciousness, in terms of the 5 senses, they speak of each sense as being a conscious. So like, eye consciousness. In order for there to be eye consciousness, there has to be an organ of seeing, the eyeball. There has to be an object which is seen, the object of seeing, and there has to be contact between the two. If any of those 3 is missing, there is no consciousness taking place. That's pretty precise, and it seems to me that makes a lot of sense. Doesn't it? Okay. So they go through the 5, we can go through the 5 senses. Each sense is its own consciousness. And the visual is the most intense one that we have, isn't it? Sight, sounds, pretty strong. Smell, taste, touch. 5 senses. That's how we experience the world. Is there any other sense through which we experience the world? Mind. That's the 6th. And that also needs 3 things to be mind consciousness. It needs some organ in the body, the brain or something. It needs an object to know, needs to know something. You can't have consciousness without, you can't have mind or knowing without knowing. You don't just know, you know something. So there has to be an object that is known. There's a knower and what is known, and then there is a contact between the 2. So mind is considered the 6th sense consciousness. And these were already fairly well established in Buddhism. And then Yogacara adds 2 more. It adds the 7th consciousness, which is called the manas, which has to do with the self, the creation of self or ego. And then the 8th consciousness is called the alaya consciousness, or the store consciousness, the storehouse consciousness. And the alaya conscience we could say it's the subtle energies of consciousness, very subtle. And the function of the alaya consciousness is to hold all of the seeds, karmic seeds, called bija in Sanskrit. And the storehouse consciousness has all kinds of seeds, good seeds, bad seeds, bodhisattvas, murderers, wholesome seeds, unwholesome seeds, good seeds, bad seeds, it's all there. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, we'll go into more when we study it, but the storehouse is both the container and the seeds themselves. So it's kind of subtle. You can't have a container without the seeds in it, but you can't have the seeds without the container. So this alaya conscience and the 7th consciousness are always continuing to operate. They never sleep, they never stop functioning, whereas the 6th sense consciousnesses don't always function all the time. You go to sleep and you close your eyes, your eye consciousness is no longer. If you're in deep sleep, your mind consciousness also is not really functioning. But the alaya conscience and the mana conscience, the 7th consciousness, they're always continuous, all the time. They never stop functioning. Now, the alaya conscience, in other words, is holding our karmic seeds based on our actions, our behavior, what we do, what we think, what we feel, both past karma from past lives or before we were born, all the way through up to this moment. These karmic seeds are stored in our alaya conscience. And they sometimes speak of the alaya conscience as being like a river or even like a waterfall. It's constantly moving and changing. It's not something solid. All these seeds are like all getting stirred around in there. And we're always creating more, putting more in there all the time. And then these seeds are just stored there until we water one of them. It's like a garden. And then you water a seed, and if you water it enough, it manifests in your life. It comes up as something you experience consciously through your 6 senses. So if you water a wholesome seed of generosity, then some joy and gratitude and something will eventually come up in your life, and you'll have a moment of joy and gratitude. If you water a seed of jealousy, then that's going to come up in your life too, and you're going to find yourself comparing yourself to somebody and you feel left out. Start wanting to compete with somebody to win. You're losing, right? You've watered that seed. You did it. That person you're competing with didn't do it. You did it. It's your mind, not their. Mind doesn't have anything to do with the other person. It's you that did it. Your experience, your agency, you did it. It's all you. You're the main protagonist on the stage here. Can't blame anyone else. And you have no second that's going to take your place if you get sick. It's all you. So now when we get to the seventh consciousness, it gets a little complicated. The seventh consciousness is completely delusional. It has no wisdom at all. It is blind. It has everything to do with the self that we create, or what we call ego. And the seventh consciousness is actually part of the Alaya conscience. It's connected. It goes into the Alaya consciousness and it grabs some piece out of there for itself and says, this is mine. And it takes it and it grabs onto it with all its might, blindly, and says, this is me. This is you. It differentiates me and not me. There's me, and then there's everything else that isn't me. And me is about surviving. Me must survive at all costs. I must have territory. I must have, I must be me. I have this body, which is me. And there's nothing particularly, it's not wrong. It's just this, we're talking about how we are built, how consciousness functions. And so that mana consciousness is blind. It's delusional. It is nothing but delusion. It is always separating and differentiating itself from other. That's what it does. That's its job. So you can think of Alaya consciousness as the base of conscience. It's kind of the ground. So there's different ways of speaking about ground in Buddhism, but we could say this is the ground of our consciousness. And then everything is supported from the Alaya consciousness. All the seeds that we water are manifested and they filter through the other consciousness. And if the mana consciousness is very active, then it's going to affect all the other consciousness. Mind, all the senses are going to be seen through that affliction of the ego. Okay? Kind of with so far so good? So this is our human existential dilemma, is that, and again, these teachings are not, this is not a philosophy about the nature of reality. This is a teaching about psychologically how we experience anything as a human being. And the afflictions that we have come from the mana consciousness. It is always trying to create territory, to grab blindly onto something and will not let it go. Grasping for territory, to survive. And that affects everything down the line from there on. It creates delusion, more afflictions, more suffering. because the source of our suffering is the self that we are attached to that creates separation between me and other, me and you. It's a very strong attachment. So the teaching of Yogacara is that you can have a overturning at the root. You can have a revolution at the root of the alaya consciousness, where you, instead of watering, if we were speaking this in terms of mindfulness, we say, and Thich Nhat Hanh talks about this a lot, you learn to, you discern through wisdom what are the seeds that are wholesome and what are the seeds that are not, and you choose to water the seeds that are wholesome. Makes sense. And then those seeds manifest in your life as good merit, good karma. Still karma, but it's good karma. You know. So what does this have to do with freedom? It is possible, when we speak of enlightenment, Kenjo, we're speaking of a realization that we can have, which we want to have, which is actually the point of Zen practice, is to realize who we are and the nature of reality. And that is the primary purpose for practicing, is to wake up, is to be enlightened. Now, it gets subtle, because if we say you need to experience enlightenment, there's a problem there, because somebody has to experience it. But enlightenment is not an experience in that way. Experiences have to do with time and space, and somebody experiencing something. Experiences have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But insight or realization or revelation isn't that kind of experience. It is a confirmation of something that you have heard in teachings. It is a confirmation of some truth, but it always happens suddenly. It doesn't happen gradually. It happens on the spot, right here, right now. So that's one side of practice, and then of course the other side of practice is that then there is character work, and we need to integrate things, and that is gradual. That is precepts that Jun Roshi talked about yesterday. That's working with all kinds of places where we get stuck in our afflictions, and there are both sides to practice. One is gradual character work, and one is never gradual. It doesn't exist in time and space. It has nothing to do with the self that we have constructed. It's outside, it's actually other than the self. And we often speak of no self, which is not necessarily a good way to say it, because no self kind of sounds like a doctrine, doesn't it? You're going to practice no self. Who's practicing it? Me, I'm practicing it. And Dogen, who is very, very precise about his words, he doesn't use words accidentally. In the Genjo Koan, he never says no self. He says other than self. The Dharma is other than self. The Dharma is what doesn't have yourself in it. When yourself isn't in it, that's the Dharma. has so many beautiful ways of saying it. There's a phrase in the Genjo Koan where he said, you know, you may not understand the Genjo Koan, but you have a feeling for it when you read it. You just have a feeling for it. It's like, this is a terrific spiritual text. This is pretty good stuff. He says that the self manifests 10,000 things as delusion. That the 10,000 things manifest the self as enlightenment. So this is our situation. We are human beings. We are born into these bodies. We all have parents. We grow up. We learn things from our culture. Some of them helpful, some of them not. And at some point we stumble into the Dharma and find that there's something here that is sane and makes sense. And you end up in a 7-day retreat like this. Think, how did I get here? Deja vu, I've been here before. So it's important, I think, actually, to appreciate karma. And that we have, you know, you could talk about these teachings, and some do, in terms of purity and impurity, that we purify our afflictions, but that sounds very moral and not a very compassionate way to think about it. But if you say we have afflictions, you could start to feel some compassion for having an affliction. It's like we all have, I have afflictions, you have afflictions, and we could feel some compassion that we have afflictions. But as soon as you say you're impure in some way, then it sounds too moralistic. Who's pure? Who's innocent? Who's not a killer? I was thinking about that the other day when June Roshi was talking about it. I had this experience back in the, it must have been, we were here in Chicago. We just moved here, and there had been some books that came out about Japanese Zen during the war, how quite a few, not all, but and within our lineage, there had been Zen teachers that used the precepts to justify killing. The first precept, do not kill, non-killing, and interpreting that from the absolute point of view, justified cutting off people's heads. That if you swung the sword without hesitation, that was keeping the first precept of not killing. Total abuse of the Dharma. Now, at the time, I was really pissed off about the whole thing. I thought, wow, there were Zen teachers that were saying this to justify the war, and then the Japanese went from Shanghai to Nanjing and just slaughtered the Chinese. It was another Holocaust. And I actually went to Nanjing to try to do a bearing witness retreat about it, but I failed because the Chinese didn't want to bring it up at all. They didn't want to deal with it. So who am I? Some crazy American going to China doing a bearing witness retreat about something that nobody wanted to think about. It was unpleasant. And but I remember being in a retreat, and I was really pissed off about the whole thing. And I was in a retreat with Nick Lee outside of San Diego, my teacher, Nick Lee Roshi. And I was doing the practice of immediacy in those days. She's the one that created the practice of immediacy. And I would, in the afternoon, I'd go and I'd draw. And I was, I was doing a lot of drawings, and what I was drawing were monks cutting off people's heads with swords on temple stairs, in temples, raping women, killing babies, blood everywhere. I am drawing this in the middle of a session, a retreat. And about the third or fourth day, I'm thinking, I'm not sure I should even be in this retreat. I'm doing this. I am killing babies. I am raping women. I am beheading people on the temple stairs. So I went to Nikki and I said, I think I need to leave the retreat. I really am just in a really dark place and I don't belong here. And she said, well, in those days, I think we were still working with the peacemaker community. And she says, Joshin, if you want to be a peacemaker, then this is your practice. And so she encouraged me to stay. Oh, anyway, so if you do this practice of the peacemaking community, you find out pretty quickly that you're not innocent. And that's one of the openings that Bernie would talk about. It's harder to be righteous about the people you think are, are bad or whatever judgment you have about them. And in fact, it had to be hard for Japanese Buddhists during the war, before the war, that there was a spirit of nationalism. They were defending themselves. They didn't have resources, and I can imagine it would have been really scary to be a practicing Buddhist in Japan and to stand up against the emperor. The whole identity was based on the emperor, and, so not so easy. So being righteous about something you know nothing about is kind of stupid. So yeah, I think working with the shadow is absolutely important in terms of. I think there is a time and a place for it. We all have disowned energies, but I think some of that language that we have from Western psychology may not be all that precise, and I actually prefer the Yogacara teachings. I think they're much more precise, and if you put them together with the 5 Buddha families, then you end up with something very rich, because what you're beginning to appreciate is that the Yogacara shows us how we have afflictions, and we create suffering, and we have karma, and we create karma that creates suffering for us. We do it. I do it. But we can also learn through practice, through bearing witness to our afflictions, not running away from them, but drawing them in the practice of immediacy, or sitting in the fire of your own anger and not looking away, can transmute that affliction into a wisdom, into enlightened energy. And there are 5 primary afflictions in the Buddha families, and they have 5 corresponding wisdoms. And the 5 emotions, and the first 3 are what we often speak of the 3 poisons, the most difficult ones to really root out: greed, anger, ignorance. Greed, desire, attachment, anger, hatred, aggression, ignorance, confusion, bewilderment. 3 afflictions. And then we add 2 more, just for good measure. Pride, arrogance, self-conceit, and jealousy, paranoia. Those cover a lot of territory, I think. And I think it is helpful when we're talking about emotions, and Scott and me were talking about this the other week, but it's talking about how we used to teach the class on the 8 wise emotions, and how it's useful to kind of limit, if you're thinking about emotions, if you think about the 5 afflictions of the Buddha family emotions, I think that's a very useful way that pretty much encompasses most of the emotions we have, or the big ones, the ones that create the most suffering. And so that's very useful to have a container, a kind of a model that says, here are the emotions, and I can identify with all 5 of them. And I can begin to appreciate that through practice, practice involves being mindful. At the level of mindfulness, it's like shining a light on something that you normally don't shine a light on, that you're actually looking at something that you do that you normally disown. That's another way of talking about shadow, but isn't this more precise to speak of it this way than just my shadow? I have to own my shadow. What's that? Yeah. Pretty dark, I guess. We wouldn't call it a shadow, but it's not precise. If I know that part of my affliction is my self-righteousness and my anger and my judgments, then I can see that with mindfulness. I can actually see it. Mindfulness can help me watch it, but I can sort of not fully identify with it. That's the whole point of mindfulness, isn't it? So I watch it. I watch the anger. I don't fully identify with it. I don't solidify it through telling the story. I'm learning through meditation to be with the anger in such a way that I don't solidify it. And then it's not a problem. It's actually a wisdom. And that anger transmutes into what we call mirror-like wisdom. The mirror is so clear. Clarity. It transforms into clarity. Because the mirror is so clear, it has no bias. It just reflects exactly what's here. It has no self in it. Yeah? It just reflects what's here without any bias. That's wisdom. That's the wisdom of anger transmuted into enlightenment. And I think that is a very useful teaching for us. And there are different ways we can come at it through mindfulness. We can come at it through Zen practice of shikantaza, just sitting, opening to whatever is here, not running away. You don't have to try to be too analytical about this. It's happening at an organic level. You're sitting sesshin, your legs hurt, you don't know what's going on, but you just keep sitting and you're confused and you're bewildered and all you have to pay attention to details. Oh, now it's service and you were thinking about yourself, but you can't think about yourself when you have to be Eno, because you'll miss the whole moment and everyone will look at you and then you'll be embarrassed. So Zen is constantly kind of prodding you to have, prajna wisdom, to sort of pay attention, be precise, because if you don't, you're going to miss the moment. And it's wonderful practice. The details. Someone was once complaining to Maizumi Roshi about the services because it's a lot of details. I won't say who it was, but they ended up being very Catholic in their practice and doing a lot of details later, but they were complaining to Maizumi Roshi, there's so many details in the service. Maizumi Roshi looks at this person and said, it's nothing but details. Well, that's irritating. Work with it. Well, you see, we have the practice for healing suffering. We have the practice for waking up. We have it. We can do it. It's not unattainable. It's like very practical. We can do this, and you are doing it. And at some point you realize it's always been here. Reality is here, whether I like it or not. And if you get out of the way, if you're not in it, then it's the Dharma. That's the Dharma. If the self isn't in it. And I think it's up to us to learn how to do that. And the self will creep back in because we're creatures of habit. But through practice, we can more and more develop habits that cultivate seeds of wholesomeness. And we can have, as a consequence, a better karmic field of seeds to choose from that are more likely to manifest as joy or gratitude or kindness or curiosity. Don't you notice this in your practice? After a few days of sitting, you're a little kinder with your spouse. I don't mean, I'm not talking about like some ideal, but you're just a little nicer. She's looking at you. I guess I better not use that as an example. You're nicer to your dog. Okay? And you're really kind to your cat. Okay? So on that note, maybe I should stop while I'm not too far behind. So you want to have any discussion or comments? Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. Very helpful for laying a foundation. So I was wondering about shame. And for me, it seems like it feeds the three poisons. So I don't know if you have any comments about how that fits into the whole thing, the sense of unworthiness.
Yeah, it's I think you could almost find any emotion that could relate to shame. Anger could relate to anger towards yourself. Insecurity, so you start comparing and feel jealous and envy of other people. So again, I want to be precise about this. So if we look at this through the context of the Buddha families, the Spectrum of Ecstasy, the book that I recommended for the class, the people that wrote this are both Tibetan practitioners. I think it's the best book on the 5 Buddha families I've read. And their perspective is if you put the Buddha family in the mandala, you put the Buddha family in the center. The wisdom quality of the Buddha family is spaciousness, tolerance, accommodating everything, everyone, all the other energies. Kind of when we think of enlightenment, that's often the quality we think of about enlightenment. It's peaceful, spacious, open. And so you can think of all the other 5 families' afflictions as being their strategy for dealing with their fear of the space. So for instance, anger, the Vajra family, when it experiences the spaciousness of that energy, it feels threatened by the spaciousness. And what does it do? It reacts with aggression to defend itself. That makes sense? Are you with me? So you can appreciate each of the families as their affliction is their reaction to their fear of spaciousness. I think it's very useful. So now you see that the anger arises because the spaciousness is threatening. Instead of opening to the spaciousness, you close down and freeze it. You freeze the space by getting angry. You being a bully, getting aggressive. That's your defense against your fear of the spaciousness. And you take all the families, the same kind of thing. The Ratna family is really earthy and generous and a big, big, generous energy. Confident, really rich, enriching energy. The affliction of the Ratna family is, and the emotion here is pride. So the affliction of the Ratna is when it experiences that spaciousness, it feels unsubstantial, which is very ironic because the Ratna family, Ratna people often get big, physically big, almost as a compensation for the feeling underneath, feeling unsubstantial. So they make up for it by creating a lot of material in the body. It's really interesting.
But not even enough.
Yeah, that the fear, the reaction of the Ratna energy to the space is the fear of the spaciousness brings up an affliction of feeling unsubstantial, unworthy. You could almost call that shame, right? There'd be another word for it. But now we're speaking in a slightly different language. So then the Ratna energy, instead of being confident, becomes arrogant. Instead of occupying the space with wisdom and enriching and nurturing energy, wants to fill up all the space and becomes claustrophobic and goes too far. Doesn't know when to stop, wants to occupy the space instead of being in it. You see what I'm saying? Well, Rinpoche used to say the Ratna energy is like pouring honey over everything. It just sticks on everything. And I've known my good friend Martina, who's a sculptor, and she was very Ratna. She's a wonderful, nurturing person, but when she was neurotic, man, you did not want to be around her. Really claustrophobic. It just become too much, like overbearing, insufferable. So that's Ratna. And then you take Padma, which is this beautiful Buddha family of relational energy, charismatic, loves people. The life of the party, Padma. You go to a party, you want to be around the Padma people. They're having a good time. They're creative, they're playful, they're fun, they're sensual, they're seductive. All the things we all want, Padma. And it integrates all the other families. Fellini, Padma. Think of a Fellini movie. Really sensual. Just Padma. So Padma reacts to the spaciousness. The fear of the spaciousness for Padma brings up a feeling of fear of losing connection with others, fear of being alone. Padma is really afraid to be alone. And so when Padma experiences that spaciousness, it brings up this fear. I'm not going to be able to connect with other people. I'm going to be alone. So Padma, that brings out the affliction of attachment. It gets more greedy, more desire, more attachment, it seduces for the sake of seduction because it can do that very well, and that creates suffering. And as that Padma energy works with that affliction gets transmuted into a wisdom of discerning wisdom. It discerns other people really clearly. It can see other people. It can be with other people. It can connect. None of the other families do this like Padma. If any of you know Jason in the hula world, have you ever met Jason? You know, he's Padma. Walks in the room, just lights up, you know. All the kids, like, they run to be with Jason, you know. Padma. It's like bees to the honey, you know. It's like everyone wants to be around Jason. So if you're not Padma, you probably feel left out, because it seems like the Padma people have a lot of fun, but they suffer too. Are you with me so far? So we have just one more, the karma, which is the doing energy. And karma is the wisdom of karma. It just gets things done. It's self-fulfilling. It almost fulfills something before it even does it. It's so efficient. It just gets stuff done. We often speak of karma as social action. If you've ever done any kind of grassroots organizing, you know you need a lot of karma energy to organize anything. And karma is associated with wind as the element. And karma experiences that spaciousness with a lot of fear, because the spaciousness isn't speedy. Karma is speedy. It's kind of aggressive like Vajra, has the same kind of quality. Whereas the Buddha energy is it's not aggressive at all. It's like totally it's so peaceful you can't stand it. It's a little dull, in fact. It's not sharp like Vajra, and it's not connecting in the way that Padma does. It's just there. So karma experiences that, gets afraid of that and just gets busy. Gets paranoid, has eyes in the back of its head, looking around, gets really neurotic, compares to everything, gets jealous. Yeah, neurotic karma is really hard to work with, because if you try to help them, they think you're attacking them, and if you ignore them, they think you're sliding them. So you really can't win. It's like, okay. So that's now you could, just to be fair about all this, you could take any family and put it in the center of the mandala and look at all the other families as being a reaction to that family. So if you put Padma in the center, you could take Buddha over here and say Buddha it has a fear of the Padma energy and gets stupid. She just gets stupid as hell. All confused, kind of spaced out, It's like someone that smoked too much dope, They're like, oh, laid back, and what, precision? What are you talking about? This is kind of chill out, dude, Just have a Coors and pop one, smoke a doobie. Listen to some music. Yeah. The sun's out. It's a beautiful day. Chill out. So that would be the Buddha's reaction to the Padma family. It would be threatened by the Padma because it's just too juicy, It's got too much juice. And so we could think of any family like that. And it gets very rich when you start thinking of it like this, because when you go through these families, you'll find there's a few that you resonate with, which is probably where your style is. And it might be in several. But you'll also find probably several that you don't really feel very comfortable with. And that's kind of where the edge of your practice is, from my point of view, is you work with that edge. I'm not real comfortable with Padma. They're just too friendly. They're too relational. I can't keep that up, I just want to go off and sit in the corner and chill out. But Padma never gets tired of being with people. And the other person is saying, it just exhausts me being with people. I want them to go home. Padma says, yeah, come on in, everyone. Let's have a party. So you can think of any family as reacting to any of the others this way too. But it is very useful I think, basically to put the spaciousness in the center and see all the other families, their affliction is the way they react, the fear they have about being spacious. And in the end, what do we mean by spaciousness? Stillness. Being still. It's, from this point of view, it's unconditional. It has nothing to do with a situation. It has nothing to do with any reference point of this and that. It has nothing to do with the ego, because the ego survives on the relative reference point. Without a relative reference point, there is no self. So the manas is always creating a relative reference point. So that was a long answer to your question about shame, but yeah. I think shame, you could almost take it for any of the afflictions and kind of see it through that lens. Shame tends to want to disappear. Yeah, shame is really just, it's epidemic, I think. I think we all have levels of shame where we feel inadequate or insecure. Anyone else?
Roshi, can you clarify, did you say that mana consciousness is delusion or is about delusion?
What?
The mana consciousness, the seventh one, is it delusion? Is it delusion or is it about delusion? When you said that it's
It's blind.
okay.
The seventh consciousness is blind. It is, and it has no wisdom. It is the way that it creates self. It's how we create self. And it tends to afflict, and then all the other consciousness see themselves through that lens of affliction that comes from the seventh consciousness.
Okay, so is that where karma is generated from? The manas, is karma generated from the manas?
The karma actually comes from the alaya consciousness, where all the seeds are. Those get, the seventh consciousness is connected to the alaya consciousness, but the seeds get watered in the alaya consciousness and then move into the seventh. There has to be, the reason why stillness is important, I think, in samadhi and practice, is that you're learning to be okay with nothing. Well, nothing. I mean, nothing. Isn't that not knowing? It's pretty close to it. Now, we have degrees of not knowing. But really, nothing is nothing. Nothing is no reference point. And if there's no reference point, then the self has no fuel upon which to build a fire, and it can't exist. It's like it doesn't have any oxygen to breathe. It needs you have to have a relative reference point to have ego, to have self. And so when we sit, you sit shikantaza and you just sit, you're not creating more relative reference points, or you might be. I shouldn't say that. You might be. But you're going in the direction of not doing that so much, which is a good thing. Any other questions, thoughts? Online, anybody? Yeah.
Morning, Roshi. Yeah, with regards to the sixth consciousness and big mind, could you make a talk about that, the sixth consciousness and big mind?
The sixth consciousness?
How it relates to big mind?
Yeah. Well, in general, when we're talking about the Yogacara 8 consciousnesses, we're kind of looking at our experience through our afflictions. So you could say Big Mind was any of the 5 wisdom energies, any of them. Spaciousness, clarity, gratitude, generosity, love, skillful action. All those are wisdom energies that reside in Big Mind, that come up from Big Mind, maybe as the apex. So there's this aspect of Big Mind in all of this that's happening all the time. When we're not creating a relative reference point, we're actually residing in Big Mind, right? There's no comparison taking place. Then all of a sudden what's here is not measurable in the way that I used to measure things. And I'm not reaching for something to know it by, because there is no knowing. I can't know this. I am in Big Mind at that point, or I'm residing in a place that is not reaching for a shiny object. So I think Big Mind runs through any of this. Now, the 8 consciousness get a little complicated, but basically the idea is that you overturn the root. In the 8 consciousness system, you're really you're overturning the Alaya consciousness. So the Alaya, and in fact, they have another way of speaking about a 9th consciousness, which they consider pure consciousness, which doesn't have any karma, and it's related to the Alaya. But the idea is that if you have a revolution at the root, at the Alaya consciousness, then you're no longer watering the seeds of karma, and you're just experiencing suchness. You experience what we call emptiness, right? That's Big Mind. So Big Mind can emerge from the Alaya consciousness when we're not watering the karmic seeds, either good or bad, from this point of view. Did that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a lot to it. I'm sure you'll go into more detail.
Yeah, we'll go into
Over angle.
We'll go more detail into the 8 consciousnesses, but the base is the Alaya consciousness, and if the transformation happens at the Alaya consciousness, then it happens throughout the rest. Everything else follows that. If you're watering seeds that create karma in the Alaya consciousness, you're creating suffering. Better to create good karmic seeds, because then you feel happier, but you could be attached to the happiness too, and then that creates more suffering. So in the end, the best way is not to water any seeds, which would be shikantaza, or Big Mind. Then you're, it gets a little technical, but they speak of 3 kinds of perception in Yogacara. They speak of seeing the image only, which is considered to be a delusion, because you're seeing something out there that you think is real, but it's not out there. So that's a projection. The second kind of perception is called representation. Now, not only, this could be clear or not, but the representation means that you are generally overlaying some kind of concept onto the image. So, Jun Roshi yesterday was talking about prejudice. If I see a person of a certain, that looks like a certain category I have in a box of that person, I apply that concept onto the person, I am making a representation of them based on my preconceived bias. And that's an affliction. That creates suffering. The third kind of perception in Yogacara is called the thing as it is, the thing in itself, which is the direct perception, which has no projection in it, no thought, no comparison, no reference point, and that's considered to be awakened perception, seeing things clearly as they are. So that would be pretty much what you're saying, that would be big mind, is to see things without any filter. Any other thoughts or questions? Was that helpful, Ungo?
Yes, Roshi.
Okay, it's past time for lunch, so let's have lunch.
I would like to ask, I would like to wash these during lunch, so if everybody can grab and unzip.
So let me make an announcement, I'm sorry, for online before you go. We're going to have council practice tonight at 6 p.m., not 7. We need to finish the session early because we're doing a Denkai ceremony for Myogetsu later at the center. So please come to council at 6 p.m. There's still the afternoon sitting. And if you're online, you can join us for afternoon sitting as well as for the council at 6 p.m. tonight. Huh?
Service.
And we're having a service tomorrow morning, same time, same place. Okay.